March 5th, 1931 was supposed to be an ordinary day at work for the manager of the Herald Square Hotel in New York City. What he never thought he'd see was a very old, very strange woman coming out of room 552, begging for help. Little did he know, things were about to get a little stranger. Clutching one of the maids with a crazed look in her eyes, she begged her to call a doctor. Her sister was dying. Typically, the manager would worry about someone dying under his roof, but at that moment, despite all the scurrying staff, all he could think about was one thing. In his several years of service and remembering every single one of his guests' faces, he had never seen this woman before. And he wasn't the only one. Not a single person on the hotel staff had ever seen this mysterious 92-year-old woman before. Once they checked the hotel records, they would find that she had been living in this same suite along with her sister for the past 25 years. And her name was Ida Wood. If you want to understand how Ida Wood's mind works, you need to go all the way back to the very beginning. She was born on January 14th, 1838, to a poor family in Oldham, England. Her name? Ellen Walsh. Her father, Thomas Walsh, was an Irish peddler who moved from town to town, taking his family along and selling small trinkets to get food on the table. They soon landed in Massachusetts, hoping fate would bring them fortune in America. But things seemingly never worked out, something that deeply upset Ellen. So in 1857, at the age of 19, Ellen packed her bags and decided that she would take her life into her own hands. In search of glamour and fortune her family could never have, Ellen moved to New York City all by herself. She fashioned herself a new name, Ida Mayfield, after Henry Mayfield, a wealthy man who owned a vast sugar plantation in Louisiana. All she wanted to do was be a part of the upper crust circles of the country, those that were living the so-called American dream. She obsessively read every gossip magazine, every newspaper article, every letter she could find. Anything really that could get her the ticket to the elite social class. One day, she came across one name, Benjamin Wood. Benjamin Wood was a 37-year-old, extremely wealthy and affluent owner of the left-leaning newspaper, New York Daily News. Ida knew that Benjamin was regularly disloyal to his wife. She also knew that she had to get close to him. But how? She ran through her options. A social event? But she never got invited to the fancy ones Benjamin attended. Get a job at the newspaper? But it had never hired a woman, and she didn't think they would change that just for her. Ultimately, she settled for her most straightforward option. She would just write a letter. She addressed the letter directly to Benjamin, stating that she knew from one of the past lovers that he likes fresh faces. She said she wanted a consensual intimacy with him, even though she knew she wasn't more beautiful than his wife. She gave him her address and waited. Ida became his mistress. She was escorted to fancy events, shook hands with important people, including the likes of Abraham Lincoln and the Prince of Wales, and was constantly showered with gifts. She had all she ever wanted, but it was still not enough. She didn't want to be just another one of his mistresses. She wanted to be his wife. Her wish would come true 10 years later, in 1867, when Benjamin's wife died, and he married Ida to fill the void. While they were married, Benjamin was elected in 1881 as a member of Congress, and his newspaper became one of the biggest in the country. Ida could taste the kind of fame and fortune she could only dream of as a child. But there was one problem. Benjamin had a serious gambling addiction. One time, he even tried to bet his entire newspaper company. It was a miracle that he hadn't lost everything yet. But Ida, who had grown up scrounging for pennies, saw the reckless way her husband spent their money and grew increasingly worried. What if he loses all his wealth one day? All her work would be for nothing. So she struck a deal with him. If he wins his places bets, she will get a percentage from them. If he loses, he will deal with those losses on his own. This turned out to be a mastermind move. She slowly piled up a nest egg that amounted to $2 million. For reference, that would be around $60 million in today's money. Soon, Benjamin died in 1900 at the age of 79, leaving Ida with all the money she could have ever needed. Everything else, in her eyes, could burn itself to the ground, including the newspaper that gave Benjamin his wealth in the first place. Just a year after her husband's death, she sold the newspaper for $300,000. But soon enough, the company fell into the wrong hands, and it fell out of business in 1906. 1907 was a pretty strange year. There were talks of a severe recession, and Ida, who grew anxious every time her wealth was threatened, decided it was time to take action. She withdrew $1 million of her wealth in cash from the banks. Her fears would soon be realized. In October of that same year, all the banks in the US crashed. Through a stroke of luck, or maybe even genius, Ida dodged a serious bullet. But where do you go with $1 million in cash in hand and a financial crisis wrecking the entire country? Her only option was to completely disappear. She, along with her two sisters, booked a suite in the Herald Square Hotel in 1907. Their suite was none other than room 552. Every single staff member reported strange things about the occupants of Suite 552. The only glimpse of the life they saw would be an occasional frail hand handing the staff dirty bed sheets from a crack in the door. The staff would never be tipped. Every day, a bellhop made a habit of asking the ladies if they needed anything. And every day, one quiet voice would answer from inside. It was always the exact same request: eggs, bacon, crackers, evaporated milk, and occasionally fish, guarding their wealth against the wretched world that wanted to get its greedy hands on it. That was until death would do them part. As the decades flew by, the sisters began growing old, and her sister, Marie, had reached her deathbed on that fateful day in 1907. So when Ida Woods stepped outside her self-made prison and called for help, she knew this action could never be reversed. As the hotel staff, the manager, doctors, and lawyers filed into that two-bedroom suite 552, they were met with a shocking sight. The room was a mess, unclean, littered, and bursting with little things and trinkets. But within this pile of mess hid a fortune. As the hotel staff took a closer look, they found $247,000 hidden in shoeboxes, a $40,000 diamond necklace, and $500,000 sewn into the pockets of Ida's nightgown. They took one long look at Ida herself, who looked as if she hadn't showered in years, and wondered, what was an old woman like her doing with this much hidden money? In their eyes, she was a weak, frail woman, deaf, and possibly senile. During the 1930s, the US was going through the Great Depression. There were a lot of desperate hands who wanted a piece of Ida's fortune, which was exactly what she was always afraid of. In September 1931, the court declared Ida incompetent to handle her wealth. She was forced into another room where nurses and doctors would keep a check on her for a monthly $3,000. When she was escorted out of Suite 552, she wept silently. Ida was trapped. On March 12, 1932, she died. By the time of her death, 1,130 people laid a claim to her wealth. Eventually, the court decided to split her wealth between the 10 relatives in Ireland, and each person received $90,000. At the time, this story was all anyone could talk about in the media. They accused her of being a trickster, a swindler, and a ruthless social climber. But in 1932, no one quite knew that behind Ida Woods' every ruthless decision were the wishes of a small-town girl in England named Ellen Walsh.